The night everything changed, I was standing in a Walgreens parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, watching my mother's taillights disappear around the corner. I had my purse. I had my phone. 7% battery. I had the clothes I was wearing, a denim jacket that was fine for the drive, but not for standing outside at 9:30 at night when the wind had that early October bite to it. And I had absolutely no idea what had just happened. Let me back up, because this story doesn't make sense without the context. And I think that's actually the part that matters most. Not just what she did, but the 26 years of smaller things that made it possible. My mother has always treated cruelty like it was cleverness. That's the best way I know how to describe it. She would do something that hurt you and then she would laugh, and if you didn't laugh along, she would look at you with this expression. This particular look she had. Like you were the problem. Like your feelings were the embarrassing thing in the room. I grew up believing that. I spent most of my childhood and all of my teenage years contorting myself into someone who didn't have needs, who could take a joke, who was tough enough for whatever she decided to dish out. My brother felt the same way, I think. But he dealt with it differently. He laughed along. That was his survival strategy. He became her ally, her co-conspirator, the person who helped make the joke land. I don't blame him entirely. I understand why he did it, but I also need to be honest about what that meant for me. It meant I was always outnumbered. The trip to Columbus was supposed to be about my grandmother's 80th birthday. My dad's mother, not hers, which I think mattered more than it should have. We drove up together, my mother, my brother, and me. Because I'd come home to Virginia for the week and it made sense logistically to carpool the 4 hours north. My grandmother lives in a retirement community outside Columbus. The visit was nice, actually. She's one of the people in my family who actually sees me. Like, really sees me. And spending 2 days with her felt like exhaling after holding my breath for a long time. The trouble started on the drive back. Or maybe it started earlier. Maybe it started when I was 8 years old and my mother decided that the best way to teach me not to be so sensitive was to make fun of me in front of company until I learned to hide my face better. But in terms of that specific night, it started in the car. We stopped at a Walgreens because my brother needed to pick up something. Eye drops, I think, or maybe allergy medicine. My mother was in the passenger seat. I got out to stretch my legs because I'd been cramped in the back for 2 hours and my lower back was complaining. I walked around to the front of the car, checked my phone, texted a friend back. I don't know exactly what my mother said to my brother inside the car before I got out. I only know what I pieced together later. What I do know is that when I walked away from the car toward the store entrance, just to get a bottle of water, we had another 2 hours to go. The car moved. I heard it before I fully processed it. The engine revving slightly, the sound of tires on asphalt. I turned around and the car was at the parking lot exit, and my brother was at the wheel and my mother had the window down and she was laughing. Actually laughing. And she called out. I could hear her across the lot. She said, "Let's see if she can figure it out. She's always saying she's so independent." And then they were gone. I stood there for what felt like a very long time but was probably about 30 seconds. My brain kept doing this thing where it tried to offer me alternate explanations. They were pulling forward to a better spot. They were going around the block. There was some miscommunication and my brother thought I was already back in the car. But none of those things were true and some part of me knew it immediately. This was the joke. This was the bit. I was the punchline. Standing in a Walgreens parking lot in Columbus at 9:30 at night with 7% battery and no way home. I went inside. I bought a bottle of water because my mouth had gone completely dry. The cashier, a teenager with braces, asked if I was okay and I said yes. I'm fine, thank you, and my voice sounded like it was coming from the end of a very long hallway. I sat down on the curb outside and I called my mother. She didn't answer. I called my brother. He answered and I could hear her laughing in the background and he said, in this voice that was trying to be casual but had something twitchy underneath it, "Hey, we'll come back. It's just a joke. Chill out." I said, "Come back now." He said, "Give it like 20 minutes. Mom thinks it's funny." I hung up. 6%. I want to tell you that I stayed calm, but I didn't. Not entirely. I walked back inside the Walgreens and I asked the cashier if there was somewhere I could charge my phone. He pointed me to an outlet near the greeting cards and said I could use it as long as I needed. I sat down on the floor next to the outlet and I plugged in and I thought very hard about what to do. The thing about this situation, and I need you to understand this, is that it wasn't the first time. Not this exact situation, but the structure of it. The move where she identifies the thing that would humiliate you most, that would make you feel the most alone, the most helpless, and then she does it and she laughs. And you're supposed to laugh. And if you call the police or make it a big deal or don't have a sense of humor about it, then you're the problem. I had let her reset that dynamic my entire life. I would get upset. She would act wounded that I was upset. I would feel guilty. I would apologize. We would move on. And then it would happen again. Sitting on the floor of that Walgreens, I decided I wasn't going to do that this time. I called my father. Not my mother. My father. My parents divorced when I was 12, and he lived in Maryland, and we have a different kind of relationship. One that isn't perfect, but has honesty in it. I told him exactly what happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Are you safe right now?" And something about the straightforwardness of that question, the fact that he jumped immediately to my actual safety rather than making excuses for her, made my eyes sting. I said I was inside a store and my phone was charging, and I was okay for the moment. He said, "I'm going to call her." I said, "Don't. I have something else I want to do first." Here is the thing I had been thinking about on the floor next to the greeting cards. I was in a city where I didn't live. I had no car. I had limited battery. It was approaching 10 o'clock at night. Even if you are 27 years old and a fully functioning adult, being stranded alone in a city at night with no way home is a safety issue. And if I called my mother and cried and begged her to come back, we would just reset the cycle. She would laugh. She would come back. She would act like it was hilarious all the way home, and nothing would ever change. But if someone else made the call, if someone with some kind of authority made the problem real in a way she couldn't just laugh off, I went to the Walgreens counter and I asked the cashier if the non-emergency police line in Columbus was 311 or something else. He wasn't sure, so I looked it up. I called it. I explained the situation calmly. I was a 27-year-old woman. I had been left stranded in a parking lot at night by family members. I wasn't in immediate danger, but I didn't have a way home and my phone battery was low, and I wanted to document what had happened. The dispatcher was kind. She asked some clarifying questions. She said she could have an officer come by to check on me and help me figure out next steps. They could potentially help me access a charging station or assist in connecting me with resources to get home. She also asked if I wanted to file a report. I said yes. 2 officers arrived about 15 minutes later. I told them everything. One of them, a woman around my age with her hair pulled back tight, listened with this expression that was very still and very attentive. When I finished, she said, "Do you know where your mother is currently located?" I said I didn't know exactly, but I knew she lived in Virginia, and I knew that if they hadn't gone back to my grandmother's retirement community, they were probably driving the highway south. She asked if my grandmother's community was in Franklin County. I said I thought so. She said they could attempt to make a welfare check, or at minimum document the incident, which would create a record. She also said, and this is the part I want to be careful about describing accurately, because I've had people tell me this couldn't happen, and I understand the skepticism. But it did happen. She said that leaving a person stranded in an unfamiliar location at night, even an adult, could in some circumstances be considered reckless endangerment depending on the conditions, and that it was worth having on record. I gave them my mother's name, my brother's name, and my grandmother's community address. I also called my college friend Adrian, who grew up in Cincinnati and had a cousin in Columbus. She called the cousin, whose name was Vince, and Vince, a 29-year-old guy I had never met, drove 20 minutes to pick me up, bought me a sandwich from a gas station, and put me up on his couch for the night. Some people are just like that. I've never forgotten it. I didn't call my mother that night. She called me 11 times between 10:15 and midnight. My brother called 4 times. I watched the phone ring and I didn't pick up. My father texted me at 11. She called me. She's very upset. I texted back. Good. I found out later what happened at my grandmother's end. I don't know all of the exact details, but I know that an officer did go to the retirement community. I know that my grandmother, who is 80 years old and was in her nightgown when she answered the door, opened it to find a police officer asking whether her granddaughter had arrived safely. I know that my grandmother then had to explain that she didn't know where I was, at which point the officer explained what had been reported. I was not there for that conversation. But I know my grandmother, and I know that my grandmother's opinion was one of the very few things my mother had ever cared about. My grandmother put me through college. She is the financial and moral center of our family. She does not tolerate what she calls meanness dressed up as comedy. My mother had to stand in my grandmother's living room at 11 o'clock at night and explain what had happened. I would have given a lot to see that. The next morning, Vince dropped me at the Greyhound station and I took the bus back to Virginia. It was 8 hours and involved 2 transfers and a layover in Charleston, West Virginia, and I ate a granola bar for lunch. It was one of the more uncomfortable travel experiences of my life, and I want to be honest about that. The resolution to this story is not some kind of cinematic triumph where I glide away in perfect comfort. I was tired and stiff, and a little sad. But I was also something else. I was steady, steadier than I had felt around my family in years. My mother left me a voicemail at some point during the bus ride. I listened to it while I was waiting for my second transfer. She said, and I'm going to try to represent this accurately. She said that she had been up all night, that she was sorry I'd overreacted, that it had been a joke and she never expected me to actually call the police. That what I'd done was embarrassing for the whole family, and that Grandma Ruth was not speaking to her, and that she hoped I was happy. She said, I hope you're happy, and the way people say it when they mean, I hope you're ashamed. I listened to it twice. Then I put my phone away and looked out the window at West Virginia going past. The hills, the trees starting to turn, the exit signs for small towns I'd never heard of, and I thought about the long conversation I'd been avoiding having with myself about my family and what I needed from them, and what I was going to keep trying to get from people who had made it very clear they weren't offering it. I had not called the police to punish my mother. I want to be clear about that because I've told the story to people and some of them have taken it that way, and that's not quite right. I called the police because I was alone and it was night, and I needed to document what had happened and create some kind of accountability outside the family system, which had never held her accountable for anything. I called the police because I was done being the person who made her bad behavior easier by absorbing it quietly. The accountability. The grandmother. The explanation in the living room. The 11 unanswered phone calls. That was a consequence of her choices, not a punishment I engineered. There's a difference. I believe that. When I got back to Virginia, I stayed one night and then I drove back to my apartment in North Carolina, where I live. And I spent about a week doing not very much except working and thinking. I talked to my therapist, who I'd been seeing for about a year at that point, mostly about anxiety, but this was clearly more relevant territory. I talked to 2 friends, both of whom had complicated family situations of their own. I talked to my dad, who was careful and fair and honest. And then I wrote my mother a letter. I want to be careful not to make this sound more dramatic than it was, because I think sometimes people expect these moments to feel like movie climaxes, and they mostly don't. I sat at my kitchen table at 6 in the morning with my coffee and I wrote down what I needed to say. It was not poetic. It was not particularly eloquent. But it was honest. I told her that what she did in Columbus wasn't a joke. I told her it had never been just a joke, not the Columbus night, and not the years of smaller Columbus nights that came before it. I told her that I had spent my entire life learning to make myself smaller around her, to laugh when I didn't find things funny, to perform toughness I didn't feel, to apologize for having feelings. I told her I was done that. I told her I was not cutting her off forever. I want to say that clearly because no contact is a decision a lot of people in situations like mine make, and I understand it, and I don't judge it. But it wasn't quite where I landed. What I told her was that I needed to take a significant step back, that I would not be available for calls, visits, or family events for the foreseeable future. That if she chose to do genuine work, therapy, reflection, any kind of honest reckoning with her own behavior, I would be open to a conversation about what a different kind of relationship might look like. But that was on her, not on me. I mailed the letter. I did not email it, because email feels too easy to dismiss. I mailed it, and I know she received it because my dad mentioned it, and then I gave myself permission to stop waiting for her response. She did respond. Eventually, it took about 6 weeks, and it came in the form of a letter that was mostly about how much I had hurt her and how unfair I was being. And I read it once, and I put it in a drawer, and I moved on. My grandmother called me, separately. She said, "I love your mother, but she is going to have to do some growing." And then she said, "You did the right thing." And that was enough for me. I've been thinking a lot lately about the version of myself that was standing in that parking lot at 9:30 at night, looking at empty space where the car used to be. I think about what she was feeling, which was humiliation and fear, and this particular specific grief of being treated like you don't matter by people who are supposed to love you. And I think about what she did next. She went inside. She found an outlet. She charged her phone. She made the calls she needed to make. She didn't call and beg. She didn't perform okayness. She didn't feel. She didn't let the cycle reset. I want to be careful not to make that sound too triumphant, because it didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. It felt like the only thing left that made sense after a very long time of doing everything else. My relationship with my mother right now is something, not nothing, not what it was. We've had 2 phone calls in the past 8 months. Both careful, both short. Both with an awareness on my end that I am choosing how much of myself to bring to this, and that I can choose differently at any time. I don't know what it will look like in 5 years. I don't know if she's capable of the honesty the situation requires. But I know what I'm capable of. That's what Columbus gave me. If you're sitting with something like this, if you recognize the shape of it, the way cruel things get wrapped in humor, so you can't quite call them what they are, the way you've spent years apologizing for your own reactions to other people's unkindness, I just want to say, you're allowed to make it real. You're allowed to call it what it is. You're allowed to stop absorbing it quietly. You don't have to wait until someone leaves you in a parking lot at night. But if they do, charge your phone first. Then make the calls that need to be made. This is JoJo, and I'll see you in the next one. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that night in Columbus. Not in a mystical way. I don't think the universe was sending me a message or that some cosmic ledger was being balanced. I think it's simpler and more honest than that. I think that what we do to people has weight, real, material weight. And eventually that weight lands somewhere. My mother made a choice in that parking lot. She chose to treat my discomfort as entertainment, my safety as a punchline. That choice set off a chain of events she didn't control and couldn't laugh her way out of. The officer at my grandmother Ruth's door, the conversation in that living room, the 11 calls I didn't answer, the letter I eventually mailed. None of that was punishment I planned. It was just what happened when I stopped absorbing the consequences of her behavior for her. That's the thing I keep coming back to. For years, I had been doing her emotional labor without realizing it. Every time she did something cruel and I cried quietly and eventually forgave her without requiring anything to change, I was protecting her from the weight of her own choices. I was making it easy, and I genuinely believe this, that I was also preventing her from ever having a real chance to grow. You can't grow if nothing ever costs you anything. The night I sat on the floor of that Walgreens next to the greeting cards, phone plugged into the wall, I made a decision that had nothing to do with revenge. It had to do with integrity, with refusing to participate in a version of events where what happened to me was fine. It wasn't fine. And I had enough respect for myself, finally, after 27 years, to say so out loud, in a form that couldn't just be laughed off. Adrian called her cousin Vince without hesitating. A person I had never met drove across Columbus to hand me a sandwich and a safe place to sleep. That still gets to me. The kindness of people outside your family can be so clarifying. It shows you what care actually looks like when it isn't tangled up in obligation and history. What I want anyone to take from this, not as a lesson someone is handing you, but as something I actually lived, is that holding your ground is not the same as being cold. I didn't stop loving my mother that night. I stopped accepting that love had to mean absorbing whatever she chose to give me, including harm. Those are different things, and knowing the difference changed everything. Resilience, I've learned, is not about how much you can take. It's about knowing when to stop taking it and what to do instead. It's about charging your phone, making the calls that matter, and getting on the bus home in the morning even when it's an 8-hour ride with 2 transfers and a granola bar for lunch. My grandmother Ruth told me I did the right thing. I'm still deciding whether I needed her to say that. But I'm glad she did.